Hello and welcome. It is Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity. Another week in the books, and for us, another exciting game. We've had a couple in a row here, trying to keep this mojo going in the right direction. I don't know what we're doing, but it's working right now, Todd.
Yeah, and it's funny too because you wait for the season to get here, and there's anticipation. It seems like it takes forever to get here, and then once it starts, man, it flies. We're in week 9, I think now. So, but yeah, we've been on a good stretch, and we knew coming into the season that the addition of those 4 teams from the West Coast was going to improve our schedule and improve our game options, and it's been great. I mean, it's really added some flavor and for us, some really competitive games as well.
Well, the biggest storyline, it feels like, in the Big Ten this week is that they've got the number 1 team in the country, and there was a possibility that we're going to have the top 2, but Georgia did climb up to number 2, which means Oregon has slotted up at number 1 in the country. Let's just start with their game. They really dominated again against Purdue on Friday, one of those Friday night games, their second one this season. So they go from number 2 to number 1 after a 35-0 win. And it just felt like business as usual. You always worry about that letdown game after an emotional win from the week before.
Yeah, they seem like a pretty mature team. I think Dan's done a good job of keeping them grounded and, with the focus on the task at hand. And Dylan Gabriel's a steady hand. He played great against Ohio State, turned around and threw for 290 and a couple touchdowns against Purdue as well. So, I'm sure they're enjoying it, even though you can't make a whole lot about being ranked number 1 right now. But it is the first time since 2012 that Oregon has been the number 1 team in the country. Yeah. So it does say a lot about what they've got going right now. And you look at the rest of their schedule, I mean, they will be favored in every game that they play. I mean, that's just the simple facts of it. But they have to continue to bring it week in and week out.
Yeah, we've seen that number 1 spot has been almost a kiss of death in certain ways the last couple of weeks here, but will be interesting to see. I think mature was the right way to describe that team. Similar with what we thought, at least in some ways, with Michigan coming in. Illinois has looked like a mature team this year, and they get the win against the Wolverines 21-7. It was their first win over Michigan since 2009. And now here's Illinois that is still ranked and still very much alive down the stretch here in the Big Ten, just 6-1 on the season.
And I think that the best way to look at that game and those 2 teams is one team, Illinois, has an identity and knows exactly what their identity is. Yeah. And Michigan, for whatever reason, has not really settled on what their identity is. And it's a far cry from what their identity had been for the last couple of years under Jim Harbaugh. And I'm not putting that on Sharon Moore. It's just the whole changeover of players and staff and everything. They just are still trying to figure it out. And unfortunately, they don't have time to figure it out, right? Because the season is going. They're on their 3rd quarterback already. They had too many turnovers in that game. And Illinois just plays to their strength. Brett Bielema's team is physical. They like to run the football. They're playing really good defense. And, to win a game 21-7 is right in his wheelhouse. So it was a great win for Illinois. We saw them against Penn State. They played well in that ball game. It gave up some points at the end, but it's a really good football team. And, the scary thing, is for teams playing Illinois, for most of the year, it's been Luke Altmaier throwing for big numbers, right? Well, he didn't throw for big numbers in this game. He's 9 for 18 for 80 yards. He did run for a touchdown and throw one, but this was not the way they've been winning or the way they've been moving the football on offense. So a really good win at home for Illinois.
One team that I think people felt needed to prove themselves in the Big Ten after an incredible start to the year, Indiana. People were wondering what they'd look like against quote-unquote a real test. Well, they got what we believed was going to be a real test coming in this week in Nebraska and absolutely demolished the Cornhuskers. What was the final on this one?
56-7. 56-7.
56-7. I mean, I was watching through the first half and I said, oh, this game's over after one half. Now, Curtis Rourke did leave, didn't return in that second half. Right. David Jackson came in and played well, but Rourke will miss at least next week. It sounds like there's optimism he could return the following week, which would be huge for them because we know how much he's meant to them. But here they are at 7-0. They're now 13 in the country. And I think Curt Cignetti's group has proven that they are very much for real.
Yeah, I think that's the case because look, I still think Nebraska is a good football team, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. Yes, they have a freshman quarterback, and he showed that in this game a little bit. They didn't run the ball really well. They didn't protect him. He threw interceptions. He got sacked. Those kind of things happen. They had 5 turnovers, kind of the bugaboo for Nebraska a year ago, right? They kind of got that corrected this year, but it came back and really got them in this game. But Indiana, I think not only did they answer the question or pass the test about playing a good team and proving that they're for real and demolishing another opponent, which they've done to everybody, they are a legitimate college football playoff contender at this point. I would really say that. Now, they still have to play Ohio State, right? They still have to play Michigan, I believe. They've got some tough games left, but they look as good as anybody. They're the number 2 offense in the leading the Big Ten in offense, leading the nation in scoring. Their defense, scoring defense, one of the best in the country. So they are a complete team, very well coached. They execute extremely well at an extremely high level on offense. They're opportunistic on defense. So I'm as impressed with them as anybody that I've seen in college football this year. Now, are they on the same level as Oregon or Georgia or Ohio State? I don't know, but based on their resume to this point, they can play with anybody. Now, the injury to Rourke is that's going to be significant. How much time he misses, when he can come back to full strength. As a former quarterback, man, I had that same thing happen. Hit my thumb on a helmet. Mine was very serious. I had to end up getting ligament surgery on my right thumb. It sounds like his was more with the thumbnail, and it may not be as serious of an injury. He will miss this week. And so Taven Jackson will have to step up. He played well coming off the bench. Now he gets to be the guy here against the Huskies.
So here's the most recent on Curtis Rourke, and we're going to get further into this later in the show, but he did have surgery this morning on his thumb, but it was very much minor surgery, and it sounds like it's mostly just to speed up the process of recovery. So successful surgery, clarity on the return date potentially. The hope, again, the optimism from this is that he can return November 2nd against Michigan State, which would be next week's game. Now, that would be incredibly quick, and it also probably hinges on how well Taven Jackson plays this week.
Right.
But positive news coming out of Bloomington this morning. They've got Washington this week before they go to East Lansing and then Michigan the following. So interesting there.
Let me add 2 things to that. First of all, the only people that call any surgery minor surgery are people that never had surgery. Right? To me, there is no such thing as a minor surgery. Secondly, for a quarterback, that right thumb is the most important digit in throwing the football, in terms of gripping the ball and releasing the ball. So how quickly he is able to do that in a normal way, that'll be a huge factor for the Hoosiers going forward, because Curtis Rourke has played all season at an extremely high level and has really led that team well.
Will be interesting to keep an eye on. So move on here to some important and really critical losses for some of the Big Ten teams. Iowa had the one loss on the season. It was early, I should say, Iowa State, and then the one loss in Big Ten play against Ohio State. They were still in prime position. You have one loss in conference, and Iowa was what we believe going to be favored pretty much the rest of the way in most of their games following that loss. And, obviously this was our game. We talked with Kirk Ferentz before the game, and the one thing that stood out was it didn't feel like he had that same level of confidence and trust in maybe his previous teams versus this year's team. He felt more confident in some of those former teams of doing their jobs. And sure enough, here they go to East Lansing. They don't have Sebastian Castro in this game, and they lose 32-20. And a lot of credit to Michigan State for the way they played out of the bye week.
Yeah, I think if you would have asked Kirk Ferentz or anybody, even us, which team do you think would be the better team at the line of scrimmage in this game? Everybody would have said Iowa. Their offensive line had played well. Their defensive line, very veteran, savvy, physical group. But that wasn't the case. Michigan State won the line of scrimmage. They were better on the offensive line. They were better on the defensive line. They ran for over 200 yards against Iowa, which is hard to do. Very hard to do. They threw the football. They had almost 500 total yards. Aiden Childs, I think that was his coming of age game. I think he did a lot of really good things. He made good decisions, had one interception, one other one that could have been picked off. But for the most part, he was going to the right place with the ball, showed playmaking ability, both as a thrower and a runner. Both their running backs ran hard, but it really was, the game was won at the line of scrimmage. This offensive line for Michigan State was much maligned coming in. That bye week, they made some great improvement. And so I really tip my hat to Jonathan Smith and their staff for what they were able to accomplish in the bye week, because they looked like a much different team against Iowa last Saturday.
Yeah, now the Spartans look like they've got a little momentum here in the back half of their schedule, and we'll see if they can keep that rolling. And Aiden Childs is going to be the biggest X factor in that. But a huge loss for Iowa, and we'll see if they can get themselves back on the horse. Meanwhile, a huge win for UCLA. Their first Big Ten win officially here comes in about mid-October. They beat Rutgers 35-32 in what ended up being a great game down the stretch. And now Rutgers, who started 4-0, is down at 4-3.
Yeah, a tough loss for Rutgers. I mean, obviously they made a comeback and had a chance to win, but 3 straight losses. And defensively, they just didn't play well. I mean, Ethan Garbers was brilliant, right? 32 of 38, 383, 4 touchdowns, but the Rutgers did not tackle well. The receivers, the pass catchers for Rutgers in this game had 223 yards after the catch. So just a lot of poor tackling and extra yards tacked on. But for UCLA, Eric Bieniemy, their offensive coordinator, Deshaun Foster, head coach, congratulations on your first Big Ten victory. And they did it in pretty impressive style on the road.
Very much so. Meanwhile, their contemporary, let's call them in LA, in a bit of a tailspin right now. USC with another loss, and they were up fairly big in this game against Maryland. And the Terps, again, give them credit for the way they handled themselves down the stretch in a comeback victory. Maryland wins 29-28 to drop USC to 3-4 after a really promising start to the season.
Yeah, let's start with the positive side, right? Let's start with Maryland. They win a Big Ten game. Billy Edwards Jr., their quarterback, his first year as a starter, he's played great all year. I mean, he was brilliant in this game, right? I mean, he was 373 and 3 touchdowns. But all season, he's completing 70% of his passes. He's leading the Big Ten in passing yardage. And so he's done his job. He's played extremely well. For USC, it's unfortunately, it's the same sad script. In all 4 of their losses, they've had a lead in the fourth quarter and just have not been able to finish a football game. They were up against Penn State 20-6 at halftime, and the game goes to overtime, and they end up losing. In all of their cases, Minnesota, they had a lead in the fourth quarter. Michigan, they had a lead in the fourth quarter. And then last week against Maryland with 13 minutes left, they had the lead. So for whatever reason, they've got to get that figured out of how to finish the game. I do think their defense is playing better than they have.
No doubt.
But late in the game, they're not. And so, I think Miller Moss has had an excellent season as a first-year starting quarterback. I think he's played really well, almost consistently. But when they've really needed defensive stops at the end of games and in the last quarter, they've not been able to get them.
No, I think you've nailed it. As a whole, defense a lot better from what we saw last year. But critical situations, and again, I'll say what I said last week, you almost have to learn how to win. And it just feels like they're missing that final piece right now in these fourth quarters into overtimes of these 4 losses. And we'll see how they can get themselves back on the Trojan horse as we go to third down. Game previews for this week. Let's start with our game, NBC, 7:30 p.m. Peacock as well, if you want to stream it there. You've got College Countdown at 7 o'clock. It's number 3 Penn State going to Madison, ready to jump around, coming off the bye week. Wisconsin's looking a lot stronger now the last couple of weeks as they're up at 5-2. And Penn State, number 3 in the country, the expectations are starting to heighten a little bit with some of these wins. You just talked about the narrow win at USC. We talked about the win that we were at against Illinois. So undefeated, top 4, top 5, one of the best teams, quote unquote, in the country. But this is a test for them going to Madison, no doubt about it.
It is a test. I mean, that's a hard place to play, and Penn State's familiar with it. James Franklin's familiar with it. They've had some tough games up there in the past. Look, Penn State should be well rested. The bye week was good for them. They'll come in fresh and ready to go. Wisconsin coming off of 3 wins in a row. But look, let's be real. It was Purdue, it was Rutgers, it was Northwestern. So this will be by far the best team, the most complete team that they've faced. Now, they lost to Alabama earlier in the year when I think Alabama was playing better than they are now.
Yeah.
And they lost to USC. But this Penn State team will be the best team that they will have faced so far this season. So it'll be a good test for them. You know, they've got to take care of the football. Braden Locke, I didn't think last week against Northwestern their offense didn't play as well. Their defense has been outstanding through all three games, but they're going to need both sides of the ball to play at a very high level.
We'll see how creative Penn State gets after some of the most impressive play calling that we've seen out of Andy Kotelnicki in the win against USC. We'll also be interested to see the bounce back for Nebraska. I mean, you just get absolutely run off the field in Bloomington last week. And then, let's go to number 4, Ohio State in Columbus in a date on Fox at noon. Ohio State's coming off the bye after the very emotional and difficult loss in Eugene. Yeah. So it's two teams that want to get a bad taste out of their mouth both for different reasons.
Yeah. This doesn't bode well for Nebraska.
No, it doesn't.
And I really do think that they are a pretty good team, but you've got an Ohio State team that still has aspirations for Big Ten championship and college football playoff, and rightfully so. That has had 2 weeks with that taste in their mouth of what happened in Eugene, right? So they are going to be chomping at the bit to get things turned around. And I know Nebraska will be too, but they're going to be a little bit overmatched in this game. And I think it's going to be very difficult for the Huskers in Columbus on Saturday.
Washington at number 13, Indiana, noon on Big Ten Network. Again, no Curtis Rourke in this game for sure. So that means Taven Jackson's going to have his chance as a starting quarterback against the team also trying to get themselves back in the win column.
Yeah, I think for Indiana, they just can't have any kind of letdown, right? I mean, things are going great. College game day is going to be there this week. You know, they were on Fox noon last week. I mean, there's a lot of hype. Everything's a sellout now for the rest of the way out for the Hoosiers. I love it, right? Craig Van Meter couldn't be happier, our production manager. Thrilled for him, right? And all Hoosiers. But they've got to stay the course, right? They've got to keep playing at a high level, executing at a high level. Knowing Curt Cignetti, I just don't see him allowing any complacency to sneak in with his guys. You know, I think he will keep the pedal on the metal and keep on those guys. So I would expect them to continue to play well. But Washington they're a tricky team. They're good enough, you know, they're good enough with Will Rogers if he's hot. And some of the skill guys they have, they're good enough to cause problems. So Indiana will have to come out fast and take care of business if they want to keep this magical season going.
One of my favorite photos that was circulating after the game last week was when they were up by 49 points and you just panned a Curt Cignetti on the sideline and he still looks irate about something. He is not satisfied when up by 49. I also love, this is Curt to a T in a nutshell. Before the game, he gets interviewed by Jenny Tapp, and she asks him something about the game, and he just says, "We're going to play well. Just period. We're going to play well." And they did. He almost speaks it into existence. So I'm with you. I don't think he allows for any bit of complacency as they head into this one. And then one of the big games of the week in the Big Ten, number 1 team in the country, Oregon, hosting number 20 Illinois, 3:30 on CBS. We saw Illinois go to Penn State. They played pretty well overall. Penn State just made a couple extra plays down the stretch in that game, but it was a close game all the way through. Can they do the same against this level of explosion with the Ducks?
They can. It'll be tough, right? Because it'll be on the road again, and we were in Austin, and we know what that's like, and it'll be intense and energetic again. They have to make it their kind of game, right? They have to make it a low possession game, a ball control game. They've got to take some of that energy and juice out of the game and out of the stadium by running the football and playing solid defense. Luke Altmaier can't turn it over. He can't throw picks. You know, Oregon, I think, is really, really good, on both sides of the ball. But I think Illinois, if they can establish some physicality in the game, they can hang around, you know. And really, I think it's their defense as much as anything. They come into the game, they've got 19 sacks. They forced 13 turnovers. So they're playing really well on that side of the ball. They got to make some things happen in this game to help their offense, give them some better field position, kind of shorten the field against a really good Oregon team.
Let's go to some make or break games here in week 9. Rutgers and USC are both in desperate need for a victory. This one's going to be at the Coliseum. Cross country for Rutgers. We've seen how teams have struggled with those travels so far this season. I mean, both, again, desperate is the word right now. They both need the win in the worst way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is, of all the West Coast trips or East Coast trips for the West Coast teams, this may be the worst because the game is Friday, number one. So it's a day less because they, Rutgers played already last week. And the game is going to kick off at 11 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. So, I mean, this is a very difficult road trip for Rutgers coming off of 3 losses in a row. You're right. Both teams are desperate. I got to believe that USC has the edge playing at home. But who knows? If it's a fourth quarter game, I'm going to give the edge to Rutgers the way USC has played so far in the fourth quarter.
1,000%. And we know Kyle Monungai is one of the best backs in the country.
Yeah.
And if you get him rolling, it can completely change the trajectory of the game. We're into rivalry territory at this point in the season. You've got Michigan State and Michigan, and we just saw the Spartans last week, and somehow both of these teams sit at 4-3 entering this Paul Bunyan Trophy game. It is massive and imperative for, it feels like, Michigan especially to find a way to win this one. But with the way Michigan State looked last week, and especially with that offensive line play, they put themselves in position for this matchup.
They have. I mean, and one of the things we said last week about Aiden Childs, we said he has to have as a focus, as a goal, that every possession ends with a kick, right? It either ends with a punt, a field goal, or an extra point. And all but one possession, that was the case for him last week. And that's why they were in a position to win and win impressively against a good Iowa football team. Same thing's true this week on the road against Michigan. Look, Michigan's got offensive issues. They're not going to score a ton of points. They're not going to blow Michigan State out unless Michigan State is careless with the football and gives Michigan short fields to work with. Michigan is still trying to figure out their passing game, still trying to figure out their quarterback situation. I think Michigan State, based on what we saw last week, looks like a more complete or a better team right now going into this matchup than Michigan. They have more answers offensively than Michigan, but Michigan still has the capability of being a really good defense, even though they're 10th in the Big Ten right now in total defense, which, with the guys they have is a bit surprising to me. But, they're both 4-3. It's a trophy game. Michigan has had the upper hand ever since, I guess 21 was the last time Michigan State won.
Yeah.
But, this is a toss-up in my mind. It really is.
Will be fascinating to watch as we move to our Xfinity Big Connections. And it's a unique connection with head coach of Penn State, James Franklin, offensive coordinator at Wisconsin, Phil Longo, in our game in Madison. Both of them quarterbacks at Division II East Stroudsburg in eastern Pennsylvania. It was Franklin in the early 90s. Then he was the defensive backs coach for Warriors in 1996, set school records for passing yards, touchdowns. As a senior in 94, inducted into the Hall of Fame there in 2016. For Longo, he was the quarterback in 1987 before finishing out his collegiate career at Rowan D3 school in New Jersey as a running back. Now, both coaches are helping to lead strong offenses. Obviously, Andy Koldenicki, a big reason for that over in State College. But cool because you don't necessarily always see the same school for two prominent coaches like that, especially when it's not a D1 opportunity.
Yeah, it is cool. And, James has got a good thing going right now. I think that the offense is fun to watch, particularly Tyler Warren. I can't wait to see how Andy utilizes him. I mean, the tight end has been so versatile this year. And so kind of fun to see how they deploy with him and the way they feature him and try to get him the football. And then with Phil Longo, I like Phil. I've known him for a long time. And, it is the air raid offense, which is different than what they did in Wisconsin for many years. But make no mistake, Wisconsin still wants to run the football first and foremost. They still have a big offensive line, big physical group. That's the strength of the team. Tyree Walker, their running back, is having a phenomenal season, stepping up as the go-to guy. And Braden Locke, who's playing well, but it's not all on him to throw the football. There's a lot of play action, there's a lot of RPO, and it's all based around their ability to run the football.
No question about it. We go to our Xfinity third chair. Time for some fan-submitted questions presented by Xfinity. And let's start with the number one team in the country. First question is Oregon's resume the best in college football? You know, their two main wins, obviously Ohio State, number 2 at the time, and Boise State now ranked up at 17. And that was not a simple game for them. They needed a game-winning kick from Atticus Sappington to get it done. I'm curious your take on this. My answer would probably be no, but they're in the conversation certainly, and there's a reason they're number one in the country.
Yeah, I mean, look, I still think it's kind of early. I have no problem with them being number one. You know, they're undefeated. The win against Ohio State was impressive over the number 2 team in the country. You know, I think the most impressive win of the season so far was Georgia going into Austin and winning the way they did against the Longhorns, because it was the road team that won, right? But they've got one loss. So yeah, I think that it makes sense right now where they are, and being ranked number 1, I think the resume is strong. They aren't going to have another test like that, you know, the rest of the way out, other than this Illinois game. This will be the last ranked team, at least right now, on their schedule. So, but there's a lot of football left to be played.
No question about it. Our second question, and this is something that you brought up, so you kind of already answered it, but we can go deeper. Is Indiana a legit championship contender? And the way I see that is Big Ten championship and college football playoff.
I think it's all on the table for them right now. I really do, based on the way they've played. I think that, you know, for a few weeks, you're just sitting there watching them. And we had them in week 3 against UCLA, and we were impressed, right? But you sit there and you keep watching, okay, sooner or later, they're going to look like what Indiana has kind of always looked like, right? Sooner or later, they're going to not blow somebody out. They're not going to look the way they've looked, but that's not been the case. And then everybody said going into this week, okay, now they're playing a legit team, a really good defensive football team in Nebraska. You know, can they still perform offensively like they've been? And they did, you know, they did. And not only did they do it, but Rourke didn't play the whole second half. And so Taven Jackson came in and only missed one pass, threw a touchdown, played very well coming off the bench. So this is a team that's extremely well coached. They execute. They do a lot of really cool things on offense, and they play with great confidence and swagger, and they kind of embody the personality of their head coach. And so, yeah, I think that they can, you know, I don't know if they have man for man the kind of roster that Ohio State or Oregon has, but shoot, they won't be afraid to line up and play. I'll put it that way.
No, they are. If they embody their coach, they are a bunch of football guys. It's 100+ football guys on that roster that are just ready to go out there and play ball at a very high level. And they're playing together right now. You can submit questions. Go for it.
I just want to say one of the other things and we talked about it when we did their game in week 3. And I think that it's getting brought up again. And I think rightfully so. Football players are football players. Good football players are good football players, no matter where you find them, right? So 13 guys came with Coach Cignetti from James Madison. And there was a lot of skepticism, probably even in Bloomington, you know, well, those guys played in whatever league that was that they played in. The Sun Belt, you know, certainly they can't be the same kind of player in the Big Ten, can they? All those guys are playing at the exact same level that they played at James Madison. Curtis Rourke was in the MAC playing for Ohio U, playing at a high level, right? All those guys that came from James Madison are not only starters and significant players, almost all of them, but they are playing at like all conference type level, you know, whether it's Surratt, the wide receiver, whether it's Justice Ellison, the running back, whether it's Aiden Fisher, the linebacker. You know, it doesn't matter. They're all playing at an extremely high level of Big Ten football. And I just think that's super cool because they are proving that they can be good football players anywhere.
It sets the tone then for guys now transferring moving forward. They might get that second look from that major program that they wouldn't have maybe in years past. And we're seeing that across a lot of college football. I mean, Tez Johnson was at Troy a couple of years ago, and here he is in the huge moments for Oregon, and he's got a 5-star recruit on the other side in Evan Stewart, and they work perfectly together. So it is a good example. Anyway, you can submit questions to the show every week by using the hashtag Big Talk. Let's go to the Knights Guard. We got to get the update. What do we got? Charlotte Christian, how we feeling?
Yeah, we're feeling good. I mean, we had a big win last week against Holy Trinity, their 7th grade team. You know, the only loss we had was against the 8th grade Holy Trinity team in week 1. And it's just a shame that the schedule wasn't flipped and we didn't play the 7th grade team in week 1 and the 8th grade team last week, because I think we would have handled both of them. But we beat the 7th grade team pretty convincingly. I think it was 38-0 at one point. And we kind of called off the dogs. And so we've won 6 in a row. We've got one last game. It's tonight, actually, at home against Covenant Day. And so it's been a really fun season. And there's a big kind of a barbecue for the team and coaches and players after the game at one of the kids' family's house. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to finishing it off strong tonight with the Charlotte Christian Knights.
No playoffs?
No playoffs. No playoffs.
Jim Morrow would be absolutely.
I mean, for the high school, yes, but not for the middle school. Yeah.
All right. Well, I like that. It hopefully will finish on a high note. You guys will be going into the off season with some momentum and some barbecue in your stomach.
Yeah, that would be good. That would be good.
All right. Well, that's a wrap for us, and we appreciate you for tuning in to Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity. Don't forget to like, subscribe, download your podcast at NBC Sports YouTube channel or wherever you get your audio podcasts. And as always, we will talk to you next week.